the center of Hungary, in a rural small town of about 20,000 people. My grandfather, who served in the Hungarian army himself as a non-commissioned officer, in charge of a large gun before the First World War, during the First War, and also two of his older sons served during the First World War. Him and his sons and his daughters-in-law and his daughters and their children and grandchildren, all taken to Auschwitz, where the children and the weak were murdered straight away, and my grandfather survived till mid-December, which was a record for more than 6 months in Auschwitz. We went home. We were taken into from out of our house into a one-room so-called flat, which was in the road, which was designated the ghetto. And we watched the large formations of bombers passing overhead to or from Germany. But Hungary itself was never threatened and never bombed. And of course, we were on the route to Auschwitz very nearly. But again, Auschwitz was never bombed. Whereas within 3 months, 436,000 rural Jews from Hungary were deported, mostly to Auschwitz, except for about 1%, less than 1%, that landed up in Austria. We were among that 1%, having been all the family being agricultural workers, and the Austrians asked for agricultural workers for the duration of the summer. My mother was not wanted for agricultural work. Nobody wanted her. She ended up working on a building site for IG Farben, carrying the cement to deep excavations for a new factory being built. When the factory was finished, we were taken to Belsen, where we were reunited with our grandfather. He died within a month of arriving in Belsen from the effects of the malnutrition exposure and the poisoned food, which was very small quantity, but his stomach couldn't take it. My little brother died within 2 months of arriving in Belsen. He was 21 months old when he died. We were taken from the railway station, which was in Bergen, on a long march to the camp, and this was beginning of December 1944, and we had to obviously abandon even the meager bedding and belongings which we had, because the march was long and my mother had to carry the baby. We couldn't carry much except the utensils in which we had to take the rations, as well as some bedding and our clothes on us. We arrived in Belsen, fell into a heap, and woke up next morning completely covered in snow, which protected us from the cold winds, out on an open. And eventually we ended up in a special barrack for children. Our worst nightmare was lack of food and the cold, because we were about 500 in a barrack. And the worst of all, of course, was to have to stand to attention in the freezing snow and cold while the Germans played around counting us and counting the people who were not well enough to get out. I collapsed, and eventually for about 6 weeks I was allowed not to go to the counting. And I watched from the window in another camp across a barbed wire how certain prisoners in the thin prisoners' clothes were kept for hours on end in the bitter cold winter until a certain number of them fell. They were left there and taken to burial straight away. I myself was able to get up after about 6 weeks in the spring and went walking with a long stick and managed to go from the door of the barrack to the end. I sat down, and a little girl who was from Polish survivors who worked in the camp kitchen gave me a potato. We also celebrated Passover there. And eventually, in April, we were taken out of Belsen 3 days before the British were handed over the camp. We traveled for 2 weeks, and about 550 odd people died from the train alone on the journey. We were surviving on some potato peelings, which my brother was given as a ration for us for the journey, and we were chewing that for 2 weeks more or less. Managed to survive. We were all sore, and the Russian army broke through the Oder and on its way to Torgau liberated us. We went back to Hungary after a few months, our father having survived eventually in Budapest, and went back home and sold his things and sent a bus for us to be picked up. We studied to catch up on the schooling we had missed, and eventually in 1949, when I was a teenager, my father realized that Jewish education was being cut out, forbidden, even Jewish practices, and he arranged for us to cross the border to Czechoslovakia, where under the help of the so-called Schlansky group, we were eventually put on a train which took us to a ship, which took us to Israel, where I studied for 3.5 years. And as my father had managed to get entry to United Kingdom, he wanted to unite the family, and I came to England at the end of 1952, where I resumed my studies.